Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we are diving back into the works of Plato. This is book 8, the second half, so we're just going to dive back into the text. We have been watching the slow descent of mankind from the best form of government, and we are currently in the second worst, which is democracy. And now we are going to see where we go from here. Let's dig in. Now, that so that we do not discuss this in an obscure manner, do you first want to distinguish between the desires that are necessary and those that are not? I do, said he. Well, desires which would we would be unable desires which would we would be unable to divert. I don't know why that was so hard. And those whose fulfillment benefits us, may we justifiably refer to these as necessary. In fact, it is necessary for us, by our very nature, to pursue both of these. Is this not so? Very much so. Then we may justifiably use the word necessary to refer to these. Justifiably. What about those which someone may be rid of through practice from his earliest years, which do not do him any good when they are present, and can indeed do the opposite? If we declare that all these are unnecessary, would we be right to say so? Right indeed. Then we should pick an example of each so that we may grasp what they are in rough outline. We should do that. Would not the desire to eat, just to maintain health and well being, the desire just for bread and for relish, be necessary? I believe so. The desire for bread is presumably necessary for both reasons. It is beneficial, and it can bring our lives to an end if we do not satisfy it. Yes. Whereas the desire for relish is necessary insofar as it confers some well benefit in terms of well-being. Yes, certainly. What about what about desire that goes beyond these? Desire for different things to eat besides this sort of food. Desire that is capable of being eliminated from most people by restraint and education from their earlier years, and is harmful to the body and harmful to the soul's intelligence and soundness of mind. May this be correctly referred to as not necessary? Most correctly. Sorry. Now, should we not say that these desires are conducive to spending money, and the others to making money because they are useful in relation to work? Indeed. And shall we say the same about sexual desires and the others? The same. Now, is it not the case that the fellow we called a drone just now, this man, according to us, is full of pleasures and desires of this sort, and is ruled by the unnecessary ones, while the miserly oligarch type is ruled by the necessary ones? Yes, indeed. Well, said I, let us go back again and see how the democratic type arises from the oligarchic. It seems to me to happen, in general, as follows. How? Whenever a young man brought up in the manner we just described, ill educated and miserly, being a mere drone, gets a taste of honey, and keeps company with wild, clever creatures who are able to ply him with a whole variety of pleasures of all sorts and types, this, you may safely assume, is the source of the change from the oligarchic system within himself to the democratic one. It must be, he said, very much so. Well then, just as the city changed when an external alliance came to the aid of one of its parts, like supporting like, so too does not the young man change when some form of external desire comes in, turn to the aid of similar, corresponding, kindred desires within himself? Entirely so. And I presume that if some alliance provides assistance in turn to the oligarchic element within him, either from his father's circle or any other relations who were censoring and criticizing him, then faction and counterfaction and internal warfare against himself arises. Indeed. And sometimes, I imagine, The democratic element yields to the oligarchic, and some of the desires are destroyed, while others are expelled. Some shame arises in the soul of a young man, and its good order is restored once again. Yes, this sometimes happens, said he, and at other times, I believe, other desires, akin to those that have been expelled, arise in their place, because the father lacks knowledge of the proper nurture, and these can become numerous and strong. Yes, said he, that is what is inclined to happen. Do they not drag him back into the same bad company, and by getting together in secret give birth to a rabble? Indeed. Then finally, I believe, they seize the citadel of the young man's soul, having noticed that it is devoid of understanding, noble pursuits, and words of truth, which are, of course, the very best watchmen and guardians in the minds of the men whom the gods love. Much the best. False and arrogant arguments and opinions then rush up and seize the self-same citadel of a man like this, usurping the place of the true ones. With great energy, said he. So, does he not go back once more to those lotus eaters, and live openly among them this time? And if any assistance from the relatives arrives to help the miserly aspect of his soul, do not those arrogant words close the gates and the walls of the kingly element within him, refuse to allow an alliance itself and to get through, or to accept the words of private persons who are older and wiser as ambassadors? They themselves do battle and prevail. Shame they rename as silliness, and they thrust it out as an exile, showing it no respect. Sound-mindedness they rename as unmanliness, and having trampled it into the mud, they cast it out too. Is it not the case that they convince him that measure and orderly expenditure are crude restraints on freedom, and with the help of lots of useless desires, they drive these beyond the frontier? They do indeed. And once they have somehow emptied and purged the soul they have occupied, and are initiating with magnificent rites, they proceed at that stage to reinstate insolence, anarchy, wastefulness, and shamelessness in a blaze of light, accompanied by a vast procession, crowning them with garlands, singing their praises, and calling them by sweet names. They refer to insolence as good education, anarchy as freedom, wastefulness as magnificence, and shamelessness as courage. Is this not somehow the way that he changes as a young man from being reared on the necessary desires to the liberation and license that goes with unnecessary and unprofitable pleasures? Yes, said he, that is very clear. After all this, I imagine a person like this lives on, spending money, effort, and time on the necessary and unnecessary pleasures in equal measure. But if he is fortunate, and his frenzy does not go beyond all bounds, and he gets a little bit older too, then once the great inner tumult has passed, he may readmit some parts that he had expelled, and not give himself over entirely to the new arrivals. He proceeds to place the various pleasures on some sort of equal footing, handing authority over himself to any pleasure that comes along, in a sort of lottery, until it is satisfied. Then he moves on to another, cherishing them all equally and showing no disrespect to any of them. Yes, certainly. And he does not accept true argument, nor admit it into that citadel. When someone says that they are pleasures that belong to noble and good desires, and others that belong to base desires, and that the former should be pursued in honor, while the others are to be restrained and kept in subjection. No, he shakes his head at all such arguments, and declares that these pleasures are all much the same, and equally worthy of honor. Yes, indeed, said he, that is his position, and that is what he would do. And that is how he passes his life, from day to day, gratifying whatever desire comes along. At one moment, he's a drunkard, charmed by sweet music. Next, he becomes a water drinker and goes on a diet. Then he starts exercising, but he soon gets lazy and completely careless. And after that, he seems to be engaged in philosophy. He often turns to politics, jumping up and saying or doing whatever occurs to him. And if he ever develops an admiration for military folks, he takes himself off in that direction. Or he might admire business people and go that way instead. There is no order in his life, nor any compulsion to do anything. And yet he calls this life pleasant, free, and blessed. And he holds to this through and through. You have given a comprehensive description of a legal equality man. And I think that he is a man of great variety, full of character traits aplenty. And this fellow, just like that city, is the fair and many-colored one. Most men and women would admire his life, which consists of so many models for systems and governments and personal traits. Yes, that is him. Well now, should we have a line to a person like this with the democracy? As a man who correctly be referred to as democratic? We should. Then, all that is left for us to describe is the most beautiful form of government and the most beautiful man, tyranny and the tyrant. Certainly. Come on then, my dear friend. What does the manner of tyranny prove to be? Indeed, it is quite obvious that it develops out of a democracy. It is. Now, does tyranny arise from democracy in somewhat the same manner as democracy arose from oligarchy? In what manner? The good that they proposed, which is the very basis of the oligarchy, was wealth. Is that not so? Yes. Well, the insatiable desire for wealth and the disregard for everything else in favor of making money destroyed the oligarchy. True. And whatever democracy defines as good, and the insatiable desire for this, is what breaks the democracy apart, is it not? What, according to you, does it define as good? Freedom. For you would surely hear it said in the democratically governed city that this is its most precious possession, and that's why it's the only city worth living in for anyone who is free by nature. Yes, indeed, that is what is said, and it is said often. Well then, said I, as I was just about to say, the insatiable desire for this sort of thing, to the neglect of everything else, changes this form of government too, and puts it in a position where it needs tyranny. How so? This happens, I believe, whenever a democratically governed city, with a thirst for freedom, gets leaders who behave like bad wine pourers. The city gets intoxicated by drinking too much unadulterated freedom, and unless the rulers are very obliging and provide the city with lots of freedom, it punishes them and accuses them of being despicable oligarchs. Yes, that is what it does. And it hurls insults at those who are obedient to their rulers for being willing slaves and mere nobodies. But in private and in publicly too, it praises and honors any rulers who are like the subjects and any subjects who are like the rulers. Now, is it not inevitable that freedom in a city like this would extend to everything? How could it do otherwise? And this must also seep down into private households, my friend, until finally the anarchy springs up even among the wild beasts. How are we saying this happens? We would say, for example, that a father gets accustomed to behaving like a child and is afraid of his sons. A son behaves like a father and feels neither shame nor fear before his parents, so that he may, of course, be free. A foreigner residing in the city has equal status with a citizen, and a citizen has equal status with a foreigner, and the same applies to a visitor. Indeed, that is what happens. It does, and there are other trivial examples. A teacher in such a situation fears and flatters the pupils, and while the pupils belittle their teachers and whoever else is put in charge of them, and the young become like their elders in all respects, competing with them in word and deed, while the elders come down to the level of the young folk by being full of banter and wit, imitating the young for fear of seeming disagreeable or oppressive. Very much so. And yet, my friend, freedom in such a city reaches its extremes when slaves, male and female, are just as free as those who buy them. And I almost forgot to mention how much equality and freedom there is among women in relation to men and among men in relation to women. Should we not follow Asilaicus and say whatever now comes to our lips? Certainly, said I, and accordingly I say that unless he had experienced it firsthand, no one would believe how much freer the domesticated animals in the city than in any other. Indeed, it is literally the case that, as the proverb says, the bitches become just like their mistresses. And indeed, horses and donkeys get used to going about the road with total freedom and solemnity, bumping into anyone they happen to meet on the road who doesn't get out of their way, and everything else becomes just as full of freedom. You are describing my own dream, said he. I experienced this myself when I am making my way out into the countryside. And the outcome of all these factors combined together is the observable softness it produces in the souls of its citizens. Consequently, if anyone tries to introduce any subjugation to any authority at all, they get angry and cannot stand it. Indeed, I am sure you recognize that in the end they don't even pay attention to the laws, written or unwritten, so that no one may have any authority whatsoever over them. Yes, I know quite well. Well, my friend, this, in my view, is the beautiful and high spirited source from which a tyranny springs up. High spirited indeed, said he, but what happens after this? The same disease that developed in the oligarchy and destroyed it also develops in the democracy, but it is more pervasive and more virulent on account of the license it allows. And it dominates the democracy completely. In fact, anything that is done to excess tends to reciprocate with an enormous corresponding change in the opposite direction, in seasons, in plants, and in human bodies, and especially in forms of government. Quite likely. Indeed, the excessive freedom seems to transform simply into excessive slavery, in the individual and in the city. Yes, quite likely. Then, said I, it is likely that tyranny arises from no other form of government besides democracy. From the very pinnacle of freedom comes the most extensive and savage slavery. Yes, said he, that is reasonable. But I do not think that is what you are asking. I think you asked what kind of disease develops identically in an oligarchy and in a democracy too, and reduces it to slavery. True. Well, I was referring to that class of idle, spendthrift men, the most courageous of whom take the lead, while the less vigorous among them follow. Those we compared to drones, some having stings, others stingless, and rightly so. Well, these two cause trouble in any city when they arise there. They are like phlegm and bile in the body, which a good physician, and a lawgiver in the case of a city, must be careful about from afar, just as careful as a wise beekeeper, so that ideally they do not arise in the first place, and then, if they do arise, they are cut out as quickly as possible, along with the wax that surrounds them. Yes, by Zeus, said he, entirely so. Well, to see what we want with greater precision, let's proceed in the following way. In what way? Let us use the argument to divide the democratically governed city into three, which is how matters actually stand. One part is presumably this drone-like class that develops there no less than it does in an oligarchy, because there is so much license. So it does. But this class is much fiercer in a democracy than in an oligarchy. How so? In the oligarchy, it gets no exercise and doesn't get strong, but because it's not respected and it's excluded from positions of authority. But in a democracy, with few exceptions, this is presumably the dominant class. And the fiercest part of it is vocal and active, while the rest gather about the speaker's platform, sit there buzzing, and will not stand for any opposition. Consequently, with few exceptions, everything in such a form of government is managed by this class. Very much so. And another distinct part always emerges from the general population as follows. In what way? Presumably, if everyone is involved in making money, those who are by nature most orderly generally become wealthier than everyone else. Quite likely. Well, that is where the drones find the most honey, and it is easiest to extract from there. Yes, how could someone extract it from others who have little? Then, I imagine, wealthy people like this are called the drone's feeding ground. Pretty much. The people would be the third class, consisting of easygoing types, those who work their own land and do not own a lot. They constitute the most numerous and most powerful group in a democracy when they gather in an assembly. That is right, but they are not inclined to do this very often unless they get a share of the honey. Do they not always get a share? As much as people in charge are able to spare, since they confiscate property from those who haven't, distribute it some to the people, but hold on to most of it themselves? Yes, he said, that is indeed how they get a share. In that case, I imagine, those whose property is being confiscated are compelled to put up a defense by speaking in the assembly and by taking whatever action they can. Inevitably, then accusation against them is made by those on the other side, and even though they have no desire for revolution, they are accused of conspiring against the people and acting like oligarchs. Indeed. Finally, they see that the people there are trying to do them an injustice, not intentionally, but out of ignorance, because they have been deceived by various slanderers. And at this stage, they really do become oligarchs, whether they wish to do so or not. They are acting against their will, but the drone is stinging them, and that is what produces this evil too. Yes, exactly. Then the two sides launch impeachments, lawsuits, and court cases against one another. Very much so. And in this situation, are not the people always inclined to put forward one person in particular as their own protector, whom they nurture and turn into a great man? That is what they are inclined to do. So, this much is obvious. Whenever a tyrant springs up, the root from which he springs is a protectorate and nothing else. Yes, that is quite obvious. So what is the origin of the change from protector to tyrant? Or is it obvious that this happens once the protector begins to do the same thing as the fellows in the story about the sanctuary of Lycian Zeus in Arcadia? What story? He asked. The story is that someone who tastes one piece of the innards of a human being, chopped up and mixed with the innards of other sacrificial animals, must necessarily turn into a wolf. Or have you not heard the account? I have. Now, does not someone who has become a protector of the people do something like this? Does he not take control of a faithful mob and show no restraint, even to shed the blood of his own people, making unjust accusations and the mob's usual favorites? And does he not drag someone into court and commit murder, doing away with a man's life, tasting the blood of his own kin with defiled lips and tongue? Does he not banish people, slay them, and hint at the cancellation of debts and the redistribution of land? Now, is it not inevitable that such a person, after all this, is destined to be destroyed by his enemies or to become a tyrant and transform from man to a wolf? Quite inevitable, said he. Then this fellow turns out to be someone who is at odds with those who own the wealth. He does. Now, if he is expelled and then returns in defiance of his enemies, will he not return as a finished tyrant? Evidently. But if they are unable to expel him, or have him killed by spreading slander in the city, they conspire to have him slain in secret and die a violent death. Yes, said he, that is what tends to happen. Then comes the request of the tyrant, all too familiar, the one that they all come up with at this stage. They ask the people for some bodyguards, so that the savior of the people may be kept safe from them. Indeed so. And they grant his request, I believe, because they are afraid on his behalf, although they are confident about their own situation. Yes, indeed. Now, when the man with money sees in all this, and a man who, besides having money, is accused of hating common people, then, my friend, as the oracle given to Croesus says, he flees along the shore of many-pebbled Hermus. He abides not, nor is he ashamed to be a coward. Indeed, said he will not get a second chance to be ashamed. And I imagine that he is done to death if he gets caught, inevitably. And yet, that protector of the people does not, of course, lie fallen, a great man brought down in his greatness. No, he overthrows numerous adversaries and stands in the controlling position of the city, a complete tyrant, rather than a mere protector. It must be so. Should we give an account of the happiness of this man, and of the city in which such a creature has arisen? Yes, certainly. Let us give the account. Well, initially, in the early days, does he not have a smile and a warm greeting for anyone he meets? Does he not deny that he is a tyrant and make lots of promises in private and in public? Free people from their debts and distribute land to people and to his own circle. And does he not pretend to be kind and gentle to everyone? He must. And yet I believe once he is reconciled with some of his enemies in exile and has destroyed the others, and all is quiet in that regard, he sets about waging some war or other constantly, so that the people will be in need of a leader. Quite likely. He does this so that they will be impoverished by paying taxes, forced to focus upon their day-to-day needs, and be less inclined to conspire against him. Obviously. And if he suspects that some people with exalted notions of freedom will not accept his authority, I believe he can come up with a pretext to destroy those people by handing them over to the enemy. So, for all these reasons, it is imperative that a tyrant stirs up war continuously. Imperative. And because he behaves like this, must he not expect to be increasingly hated by the citizens? How can he not expect that? And will not some of those who helped him come to power and are in power themselves speak frankly to him and to one another, criticizing the things that are happening, those who are brave enough to do so at any rate? Quite likely. So the tyrant needs to do away with all these people secretly, if he is to have authority, until finally there is no one left, friend or foe, who is of any use to him. Evidently. So he must keep a sharp eye to see who is courageous, who has a great mind, who is intelligent, and who is wealthy. And such is his blessedness, that whether he likes it or not, he must be an enemy to all these people, and conspire against them until such a time as he cleanses the city. A fine cleansing that is, said he. Yes, it is the exact opposite of what physicians do to bodies. They remove the worst and leave the best, but the tyrant does the opposite. Yes, said he, it seems he needs to do this if he is to rule the city. So he is bound by the blessed necessity which directs him either to live alongside people who are, for the most part, quite ordinary, or else not live at all. He is. Now, is it not the case that The more he is hated by the citizens for doing all this, the greater his need for more bodyguards who are more trustworthy. He has no alternative. So who are these trustworthy people? And where will he source them from? Lots of them will fly in of their own accord once he comes up with the money. Mother dog, I think you're referring to some more drones. Foreign ones this time, of all varieties. Yes, I think that is true. What about local ones? Would he be at all reluctant to take the slaves away from the citizens, set them free, and then make them part of his own circle of bodyguards? He will be very keen to do so, since men like this will be extremely loyal to him. What a blessed thing this tyranny is, if it relies upon such people as trusted friends, having done away with their predecessors. But of course he relies on people like this. And these companions of his admire him, of course. And the new citizens associate with him, while the respectable citizens hate him and avoid him. What else could they do? It is no wonder that tragedy is generally thought to be wise, and Euripides is thought to excel in it. Why so? Because he uttered the following maxim, both born of cogent thought. Tyrants are wise by associating with the wise. And he meant, of course, that these people with whom the tyrant is associating are wise people. And he praises the tyranny, and, said he praises the tyranny of the equal of the gods, and he himself says much else besides, as do other poets. And that is why the tragic poets, being wise, forgive us, and those with a form of government similar to ours, for not admitting them because they are advocates of tyranny. I think that the more civilized among them do forgive us. And yet, I believe, they go around the other cities, and by gathering crowds and paying for services of good voices that are loud and persuasive, they influence those regimes in the direction of tyranny or democracy. They do indeed. And besides this, will they not receive payment and be honored too, mostly, as seems likely, by tyrannical regimes and to a lesser extent by democracies? But the higher they climb along the ascending scale of systems of government, the more their honor starts to flag, as if it were unable to go any further because it's out of breath. Yes, indeed. But we have digressed here. Let us go back to that noble, numerous, variegated, and ever-changing army of the tyrant, and say, how is it supported? Obviously, if there are sacred treasures in the city's temples, he will spend these for as long as the proceeds from their sale is sufficient, and make the people contribute less. And what happens when this runs out? Obviously, he himself, his fellow drinkers, and his companions, both male and female, will be supported from his father's estate. I understand. The people who brought forth this tyrant will support the man himself, and his companions too. They need to, very much so. What are you saying? What if the people get angry and say that it is unjust for a grown-up son to be supported by his father, and that it should be the other way around? The father should be supported by the son. That was not why they created him and put him in place, so that when he had grown up the people would then be enslaved by their own slaves and end up supporting him, along with the slaves and a rabble of others too. They wanted to be liberated from the wealthy classes and the so-called noble and good people in their own city, with him as their protector. What if they now order him to get out of the city, himself and his companions, like a father driving an errant son out of the house, along with a rabble of revelers? By Zeus, the people would then realize what sort of beast they had brought forth, embraced and encouraged. They are now the weaker party, driving out someone stronger. What do you mean, said I? Would the tyrant dare do violence to his father, and aim a blow at him if he was not compliant? Yes, said he, after he had disarmed him. You are saying that the tyrant is a parasite, and a harsh nurturer of the aged. And it seems that this would indeed be undisguised tyranny. And, as the saying goes, in fleeing from the smoke of slavery to free men, the people would have fallen into the fire of total subjugation to slaves. Indeed, of that vast and immoderate freedom, they have donned a new robe, the harshest and most bitter slavery. Slavery to slaves. Yes, that is what happens. Very much so. Well then, would it be appropriate for us to claim that we have given a sufficiently detailed account of how tyranny follows after democracy and what it is like then? Sufficiently detailed indeed, said he. And so ends Book 8. We will be back in Book 9, but for now, I think there are some very severe things that we can learn from this. We have people today doing the very things that are described here 3,000 years ago, the things that led to the fall of Athens. The fall of Athens and the rise of Rome was an extended period of time, and it was not bright. We are, right now, on the edge of following in the footsteps of history once again, because that is what happens. History doesn't rhyme. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. We are very close to this. These very same arguments are being made today. These very same consequences are being played out today. This is not something unusual. This is something that could have been written as prophecy. We are seeing this today. Everything described in here, from the descent from where we were meant to be, the Republic, to where we are now, with people striving hard for us to be a democracy so that they can rapidly enact the tyranny. That is a real thing. That is actually happening. And I don't care which side of the political aisle you're on, somebody on your side is feeding it. We need to get back to the basic values that are being outlined in the Republic, right? We need to hold ourselves responsible to the things that are being told here, the things that we know we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do the right thing. We know that. We need to do that. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. It is quite scary to read this and see it, right? And I'm trying to be a little dramatic and read it with emphasis, and that's making it stick in my head at what is actually going on here. It's wild. If you look at our current situation and you look at the situation in Athens then, it's wild. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.